So if you haven't heard, last midnight the UAW announced a strike. In fact, their president, Shawn Fain, said exactly this.
Tonight, for the first time in our history, we will strike all three of the big three at once.
Now, just yesterday, I released a video explaining how this would wreak havoc on the legacy automakers, but would actually benefit Tesla in a win-win situation. And I talked about how we were most likely going to be seeing Ford and GM stock continue falling down. But what we saw instead was today, GM stock and Ford both actually started bouncing upwards and closed a little bit higher than the day prior. Now, this was simply because early in today's trading session, we actually heard some optimism from the CEO of GM. In fact, this is exactly what Mary Barra said.
What's your sense in terms of how long this strike may go?
I think the strike can get resolved very quickly. Again, we have a historic offer on the table.
And so even though we saw both GM and Ford stock bounce up today, the real issue is that if this strike lasts much more longer than what the CEOs expect, then of course this could again wreak havoc for these legacy automakers. However, while we saw the legacy automakers bounce up today, we actually saw Tesla stock fall downwards. Now, this morning in the Push and Profit private group at 10:04, I've said that when I've called on yields as a pressuring force to the markets and noted elevation, we've yet to see a time where that didn't hammer the indexes, and today was no exception. As noted, all the technical lines and charts go out the window, because if investors could get a risk-free return, like the yields going up, then they will exit higher risk positions like stocks. And so we had yields elevated due to economic concerns, which is why we saw the overall indexes pretty much fall downwards along with Tesla. However, we still have a lot boiling up with Tesla, and in this video, I want to go ahead and hop into my laptop and cover some of the topics that we absolutely have to be aware about in regards to Tesla. Alrighty, so we are officially in my laptop taking a look at Tesla stock, and as I mentioned, we saw Tesla stock pretty much close lower than the day prior, but this wasn't just Tesla stock and silo. In fact, as I pointed out, we saw the overall markets like the QQQs, which is the Nasdaq Index ETF, fall down, as well as the S&P 500 Index ETF, ticker symbol SPY. So we saw the overall markets fall down, yet we actually saw Ford trickle upwards a bit, as well as GM. Now again, this is because there was some optimism of this strike possibly closing, but this is not real optimism, as this is just what the CEOs are saying. Of course, they're going to want to say that they expect the strike to not be any much more longer. So that is just false optimism, and we actually don't know how long the strike can go. But what we do know is obviously individuals who are selling went ahead, or individuals who were possibly short selling went ahead and covered their positions, pushing the stock upwards, hoping that, hey, if a deal does come through, well, the stock is no longer going to fall down. However, the real issue is that even if a deal does get striked, right, or that's probably not the word, the best word to say, but even if a deal does get negotiated between the UAW as well as these legacy automakers, that's still not going to be good, because the operating margins for these companies are going to dwindle down much further. And we know that the business models for both GM and Ford are not doing too well, especially when we look at the next generation vehicles, such as what they're doing with their electric vehicles, where they're not even profitable. They're losing more. The more electric vehicles that they sell, the more profits that they lose, or actually not the more profits, the more money that they lose, right? And it's simply because they don't have the infrastructure. And so we have a win-win situation for Tesla, because a strike or deal, regardless of what the situation is, just puts pressure on both GM and Ford. But let's go ahead and talk about Tesla, because while GM and Ford have potential issues with their production numbers, right, coming up, one of the things we know with Tesla is that they're actually ramping up their factories, right? And actually, one of the things that is coming pretty soon, right? Hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we're going to get news of the Cybertruck deliveries getting started. Now, this is only if Elon Musk holds his end of the promise of what he said in previous earning calls, where he said that he expects the Cybertruck deliveries to begin in late September. So we're at a very pivotal moment, because as I've highlighted in previous videos, Tesla has been trickling upwards, and guess where we're at? We're testing again this line over here, which has been a descending trend line for quite some time. I've been talking about this descending trend line for quite a while and how it's been a resistance for Tesla. And so if Tesla finally breaks above this descending trend line, well, what does that mean? That means that a new trend has been identified for Tesla and things can push upwards. Now, we have the catalyst event of Cybertrucks looming around the corner. And then, of course, on September 20th, which is just 5 days away, we get the Federal Reserve making their decision on monetary policy on whether they should hike or pause or cut. Now, most likely, the future markets are predicting that the Feds are going to pause. Now, this is something I've said for a while now, and that could be seen as a little bit as an optimistic sign that we're getting closer and closer to some cuts from the Federal Reserve. I still think that for November's meeting, that there's still a lot of uncertainty, and the future markets are still pricing in that it's still like a 40% chance that they may hike in November. So that's still an issue. But in the short term, we may get some relief for the overall markets if we see the Feds pause. And if along with that we get the Cybertruck news, well, that could be the catalyst event that pushes us just over. So we're definitely at a pivotal moment. Now, oftentimes when I talk about Tesla stock on this channel, I talk about it from two different perspectives. One from a long-term investment and one from a short-term perspective of a trader, right? So as far as Tesla, my long-term portfolio, I've said it over and over again, I like to buy at two distinct spots, right? I like to either buy when Tesla stock sells off aggressively and then confirms an uptrend going upwards, or when it breaks a trend or breaks above, initiating a new trend. So if we see Tesla break above, I definitely plan on adding more Tesla shares into my long-term portfolio. However, this is not me telling you guys to do that. Of course, you guys should only trade or invest in whatever you see value in, and do your due diligence. You should never buy or invest just based on anyone's recommendation, regardless if it's me, anyone else on YouTube. It doesn't matter if it's Kathy Wood on YouTube or any other fund manager talking about what they're doing for Tesla, especially because when you're listening to these fund managers, you can't really go off of what their actions are doing. For example, just a couple of days ago, we saw Kathy Wood shave off about 51,000 shares of Tesla, which was a hefty amount. However, one of the things we have to understand is that these ETF fund managers, they play by a different game in which they have to make sure that their holdings for one particular stock doesn't exceed a certain threshold, and that's something that's just mandated with one. I think it's don't quote me on it. Maybe 1940 Investment Act. I honestly don't remember the law, but it's something that they have to do to protect their investors who invest in their funds, where they can't have too much exposure into one stock. And while individual investors, they could have a little bit more exposure to Tesla. For example, I have a little bit more exposure to Tesla than any other holding, but I do tend to invest in more ETFs. I'm kind of a boring investor. The only few stocks I have do consist of Tesla, Nvidia, and I believe there's a couple others. But anyways, definitely an exciting moment. Now, if you're a trader, this is also an exciting moment because we could have, again, those catalyst events that push us up into, closer into a new trend. Or if we get rejected right over here with this descending trend line, well, guess what? That can be an area to start shorting Tesla again. And if we get some bad news going into the third quarter, well, again, then we could short Tesla in the short term with your short-term portfolio. Now, I know a lot of people get that confused. How can you be shorting Tesla and going long? It's simply just a tool that I use to hedge Tesla in my long-term portfolio. There's several ways to do it. Warren Buffett, what he tends to do is when he's investing in the company long and the company's falling down, what he'll do is he'll go ahead and sell calls to collect premium. So there's several different ways to hedge your position in the market. I personally just like having a long-term trade investing account and then a short-term trading account to really hedge my positions. But again, you are free to do whatever you see value in. But with that said, I want to keep this video very short, sweet, and concise. And I want you guys to let me know, what are your thoughts on Tesla in the next couple of weeks as we end into September? September has historically been a volatile month, but so far for Tesla, it hasn't been too bad of a September. But with that said, guys, I'll end it right here, and I'll see you guys on this next video. Take care, guys.